The Shadow, the Hydra, Chapter 9. It was noon when Dr. Rupert Sayre told the nurse to remove the oxygen tent. That done, Sayre had to look at his patient, Lamont Cranston. The oxygen had proved efficacious, the best of treatments considering that Cranston had been treated to about every other kind of gas the night before. Of course, the hospital reports did not indicate it. Only Dr. Sayre knew what the Shadow had gone through. Sayre had heard the true facts from Burbank, as relayed by Moe, who had learned something of what had happened inside the scientific museum while waiting for the Shadow to rejoin him. Burbank had stressed one point: if possible, Sayre had to suppress the fact that Cranston was hospitalized. Sayre managed to do this because he was Cranston's private physician. Moreover, Sayre knew that his present patient was the Shadow, to whom he owed a great debt. Not only had the Shadow once rescued Sayre from death, he had set up the young physician in a Park Avenue practice. Thus Sayre would go to any limits for the Shadow, and in this instance the doctor was keeping himself a thing that he had long suspected, namely that there were two Cranstons, a real one and the one who used Cranston's personality when the occasion required. Sayre also was convinced that none of the Shadow's other agents, with the possible exception of Burbank, knew that there were two Cranstons. To preserve the Shadow's all-essential secret, Dr. Sayre announced that the patient would be discharged from the hospital. He said he'd call for Cranston personally, but that until he returned, the oxygen treatment could be continued. Sayre gave the impression that he would be back very shortly, but when he left, he was with the actual intention not to return until late in the afternoon. Knowing the whole story of this case, Sayre felt that the more oxygen his patient received, the better. Thanks to Sayre's system, it was quite all right for the real Lamont Cranston to keep a 1 o'clock luncheon appointment with Commissioner Weston. Should the matter ever be uncovered in the future, Weston might be surprised to learn that Cranston had come straight from the hospital, caught to lunch with him. But there was no question of an overlap. The hospital records would show that Cranston had been discharged in time to keep his appointment. During lunch, Weston spoke briefly of a strange accident that occurred the night before. He told how the mechanical marvels at the scientific museum had gone berserk and killed an unidentified visitor who had been in the place. Mangled beyond recognition, the victim had paid a ghastly penalty for toying with a power lever that shouldn't have been touched. The attendants had done their best to save the fellow, but without avail. Next, Weston shifted a far more important subject, a tip-off that the police had received. "It may have been a crank call," declared the commissioner, "but we cannot ignore it. Our informant claims that criminals intend to stage a robbery at the Paragon Trust Company sometime today." Cranston looked interested as he inquired, "More of the Hydra's work?" "Very probably," returned Weston, "unless the whole thing's a hoax, but I can assure you that robbery will be impossible. Inspector Cardona is watching the bank building with a dozen plainclothes men. He has 2 armored cars bristling with machine guns. They look like bank cars, nothing more. Crooks will be due for a real surprise if they start anything." Weston was adding that they'd start down to the Paragon Trust after they finished lunch, when Cranston was informed he had a phone call. Answering it in the booth, he was a bit startled to hear his own voice over the wire. Then, realizing that it must be the Shadow, he relaxed. "Hello, Cranston," said the Shadow. "Where do you suppose I just woke up? In an oxygen tent of all places." "I envy you," replied Cranston. "You must be far more comfortable than I am in this phone booth." "I won't keep you long," the Shadow promised. "All I want you to do is give our friend the commissioner the slip after you finish lunch, so that you can take my place." "Exactly. I'll show up outside the club after he begins to get tired waiting for you." "Very good," agreed Cranston. "Anything else?" "One more thing," stated the Shadow. "Insist upon an extra cup of coffee, and make sure it disagrees with you." "But coffee never disagrees with me." "A bit of spoof, old man," the Shadow interrupted. "I'm like to have a dizzy spell in the commissioner's car. I'd rather he attributed it to an overdose of caffeine and too much oxygen. I'll see you later, Cranston. Much later." Down at Paragon Trust Co., the tellers were returning from lunch one by one. They worked in relays early in the day, but all were in their respective cages during the final hour from 2 o'clock to 3. They had to be, for the Paragon Trust was always flooded with customers near closing time. Stolid fellows, these tellers. They didn't even nod to one another. They took their places. Each simply opened his window, hung his nameplate on the bars, and went to work taking in deposits and paying out checks. The tellers hadn't been informed of the robbery rumor. It wasn't necessary to bother them. Each had a revolver within reach of his hand, an alarm treadle where his foot could press it. 2 watchmen were on duty, ready with guns and tear gas any instant. Cole. The bank was set to stave off any average robbery. As for the sort of crime the Hydra might order, the police would take care of that. As Weston had told Cranston, they were all about the place. Certain plainclothes men took their places in the long lines of customers leading to the tellers' windows, then stepped out again and reported to Cardona across the street. It was business as usual at the Paragon Trust Company. Others beside Cardona's men could so testify. The others were the Shadow's agents. 3 were on the job. One was Rutledge Mann, an investment broker, another a friend of his named Harry Vincent. They had business in the bank, arranging a loan through a cashier. The third was Clyde Burke, present as a reporter at Cardona's invitation, since Clyde had somehow learned about the threatened robbery. Going in and out, Clyde had not only caught nods from the other agents, but checked on Cardona's men and carried messages from them to the inspector. There were some odd-looking characters in the lines outside the windows, but that was to be expected. Since this was a wholesale district representing a cross-section of Manhattan life, none of those customers ventured a false move. They were here only to deposit cash or withdraw. Some of the deposits were very large, so were the withdrawals. Many of the customers had bags into which they dumped big handfuls of banknotes and rolled up stacks of change. Clyde didn't bother to count those sums. The mere fact that a customer's check was accepted by a teller marked the man as honest, much to Clyde's estimate of the customers. As for the tellers, he didn't give them a second look, nor did the headquarters men bother to watch them. The tellers were so many human machines going through the same old routine. They all looked alike, except for the nameplates in the windows. Skilled men who could count out money, so trained in work that they lost all individuality. Even when they went out to lunch and came back, they followed an identical routine. True, one wore tortoise shell glasses, another was rather baldish, while a third had hunched shoulders with a broad chin squatting between. You could tell them apart when you studied their features closely, but no one ever did. Through the barred windows, their faces weren't easy to discern, while the sides of their cages were so heavily grilled that each teller had but little chance of recognizing the man next door to him, except by voice. Occasionally, one needed more money and asked his neighbor for it, whereupon a wicket opened and bundles of cash were pushed through from one cage to the next. From the customers, the tellers received only glances, along with the occasional nod. During the rush hour, there wasn't much time to chat with the men in gray tellers' jackets. They were too busy. And other customers became annoyed if persons ahead of them held up lines. Yes, the men in gray were very busy. All their business was the Hydras. The 3 tellers in the middle were teeth, all servers to the head, styled himself number 7. They weren't the men whose names were on the windows, though they made up to resemble them. Nor were certain customers who thronged through windows, regular depositors in the Paragon Trust. Checks were coming in from those center windows, made out to sums like $50,000, bearing such signatures as John Doe and Mary Lamb. Some checks were inscribed in jestful fashion, saying Diller dollars and nonsense, or anything else that pleased the eyes and ears who presented them. To every one of those fake customers, the false tellers shoved big bundles of currency, wherein large bills were hidden by small ones and were on the top and bottom of the packets. Rolls of coin went along. It made it look as though customers were bona fide wholesale merchants. An apt term for the Paragon Trust Company was being robbed wholesale under the eyes of the guards, the surrounding police, and the watchful agents of the Shadow. Robbed in fashion as simple as it was unique, through the process of pushing all the available cash right through the teller's windows into the hands of ready takers who had come here by design. The Paragon Trust was paying through the nose and under it. Occasionally, the middle teller left his window and went back to the vault to come back with more money for the bags, briefcases, and wallets of pretended customers. Usually, that central man supplied the tellers on each side of him, that they were also drawing heavily on the bona fide tellers who flanked them, so heavily that the men on the flanks had to go to the vaults themselves, but by then it was closing time. The lines of customers were thinning. First, the central teller slapped to the front of his window, gesturing customers to the others. Before the lines could shift, 2 more windows were shut. That sent the customers to extreme flanks to stand in front of vacant windows, for both the genuine tellers had gone to the vault. They hadn't returned because they couldn't find any funds, which is why the middle 3, the Hydra's men, had described to close shop so suddenly. They didn't even stop at lockers to change from their gray linen cloaks. Coming out of the door near the cashier's office, the 3 fake tellers followed right past the watchman and Cardona's detectives and went out the street. Simultaneously, several customers with empty bags decided that they didn't need any money after all and headed for the same door. They had a right to leave if they wanted, so no one tried to stop them until Clyde Burke, who had a reporter's eagle eye, realized that what looked like usual was producing the unusual. Clyde gave the signal. Up from beside the cashier's desk swung Harry Vincent, leaving Rutledge Man to talk of loans. The Shadow's two agents could have stopped the sudden exit of tellers and customers if they'd only been able to draw guns, but that mere action would have brought the guards their way instead of sending them after the departing crooks. Reaching the door together, Harry and Clyde sprang to the sidewalk, their hands going for their pockets. They were caught flat-footed, too late to drop back, flanked by the bag-carrying customers. Three crooks in gray were displaying revolvers borrowed from the bank itself. Sensing trailers from the bank, the fake tellers had their guns close to their hips, their faces no longer placid in expression. The need for disguise was over. These men would show the savage looks that went along with murder. Murder it would have been, but for a rapid intervention, a startling episode in full daylight. A door flipped open from a big official car that was stopping near the corner. From it lunged a man who looked like Lamont Cranston but wasn't. The arrival was the Shadow. He wasn't clad in black, nor did he grip an automatic. The gun in his hand was a stubbly police positive that he had snatched from the handy pocket of the police commissioner in the car beside him, nor did the quick flinging attacker deliver the Shadow's famous laugh. All that his rescuer did was open fire, and it was enough. As the gun barked in their direction, murderous crooks forgot the helpless men beside the bank door and swung to do battle with the Shadow.